We are continuing on our NHL season preview series today. We're taking a look now at the Winnipeg Jets. Will they be able to make the playoffs in a very tough Canadian division? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we're continuing on our NHL season previews. Obviously, we're not going to get through a whole lot of them, but I did vow to try my best to get through at least the Northern or the Canadian division here. We have 3 teams completed so far. This is number 4. There will be a link in the top comment below, but the playlist in case you missed the other ones. We've already covered Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa. We're working our way west. So, of course, we still have the Flames, Oilers, and Canucks to come up. And I'm hoping to get those done here in the next day or so. So that's first up. We're going to recap the Jets season from last year, talk about how things went. Then we're going to take a look at what their objectives were heading into the offseason, how they handled those by making additions and subtractions to their roster, and then kind of giving my projections on how things are going to go based on what those moves that they've made. So let's take a look now first up at how things went last year. Now, last year they had a decent season, but certainly took a step back. They had a record of 37, 26, and 6 for 80 points in a very tough Central Division. Of course, the NHL season was paused, and they ended up going to the playoffs based on the qualifying round and the expanded format that we had. But unfortunately, they lost early on to the Calgary Flames. And also what played a big part in that loss to the Flames as well. Yes, the Flames had a good short series, but they also lost top center iceman and one of the top players and one of the top players in the league, Mark Scheifele, in the very first game, and I believe it was in the very first period, if I remember correctly, was a pretty significant injury that kept him out of the rest of the playoffs due to an awkward collision with Flames forward Matthew Tkachuk. So I personally do think the Jets would have had a better fate if that injury wouldn't have taken place. I can't say with absolute certainty they would have beat the Flames, but I know heading into that series, I thought they stood a really good chance, and at the end of the day, I think that they very well could have, and they could have had a very different end to their season. I mean, the Winnipeg Jets last year were held by their backbone, Connor Hellebuyck, had a Vezina Trophy type season, and it really was a large part of why they were able to be in so many games and have so many chances to win. Obviously, their blue line was battered after a major reconstruction of loss of players in the last offseason and starting the year without Dustin Byfuglien. They really have gone through a lot as a franchise in the past year or so. So the fact that they were still hanging around the playoffs was really quite decent in my opinion. Now, of course, they have some more objectives heading into this year. Of course, they want to take things back up a notch, and their main objective was certainly to kind of rebuild that blue line. They started the process a little bit last year, but didn't get too far with the process. They did acquire Dylan Demelo at the NHL trade deadline, which was a nice addition for them. They only had to give up a third-round pick for that, and he fit in quite nicely. I know Paul Maurice was quite fond of what he was able to bring back there, so they had to continue building on that to make the blue line better. Of course, they had to address some trade, discussions around some players who they felt, and we feel based on the rumor mill, want out of town, and that includes forwards Jack Roslovic and Patrik Laine. I mean, obviously, neither one of those players have been traded as of yet, but they've both made it known to the franchise that they would prefer to continue playing elsewhere, and it's probably a matter of time. Now, Roslovic, I think, is probably more likely to be traded in the short term, but a Laine trade at some point here is certainly a real possibility, and Jets fans need to brace themselves for that. Obviously, the former number 2 overall pick just doesn't seem quite content where he's not getting top-line minutes, top-line power play all the time. And, understandably so. I do understand his frustrations to some degree, but at the same time, I understand why they want to balance the lines out the way that they do. Now, the other big hole that they needed to address on this team throughout the offseason was that number 2 center position. They've had a revolving door there as of late. They acquired Kevin Hayes. The year before that, they acquired Paul Stastny. They've had Brian Little there off and on the last few years, but he's battled a ton of injuries. They need somebody who can step into that role and be consistent and really help provide that necessary depth, because that's been a major piece that's been missing to kind of balance out that top 6 and to be able to take the pressure off the Scheifele line a little bit more, and also at the same time keep Patrik Laine happy, because he quite often plays in that second unit, and obviously you need a good center to help keep him productive as well. We know Laine wasn't real fond of playing with Brian Little. He did even make some comments at one point kind of taking some knocks at him. So we'll see, obviously, in the next part of our discussions here, what they've done to address these objectives. So let's jump over and take a look at the additions, any subtractions to this roster. We even, in fact, saw some last-minute changes here today through the waiver wire. So let's take a look here. I'll put up a graphic on the screen so you can follow along here, because obviously there is a decent amount of turnover for this Jets team. From the subtractions here, we'll look at that first. Obviously, they no longer have Cody Eakin, who they acquired last year at the deadline. He was another recent addition to be a center iceman for the Winnipeg Jets, but unfortunately, mainly due to cap reasons, they were not able to retain Eakin in the fold here. Of course, you got Dmitry Kulikov also left via free agency. They also had Mark Letestu, who's no longer playing in the NHL. He announced his retirement. And of course, you also have Lucas Biza and Eric Comrie, who they had previously signed in this offseason, and again lost in waivers today. I mean, a lot of teams had players through the waiver wire. In case you missed our recent videos here in the last day or two, like there's been a ton of players on the waiver wire that the NHL teams have had to do that for to create their final roster. So a lot of players needed waivers to either go to the taxi squad for the expanded rosters that are allowed this year, or to be assigned to their AHL affiliate. And obviously, these guys were plucked by other teams. Comrie ended up going to New Jersey after they lost Corey Crawford, who surprisingly retired at the last minute. And then you get Spiza, who was claimed by Nashville, looking for some extra depth on the blue line as well. So would not be surprising if the Winnipeg Jets do try to find some alternatives here to replace these guys. There's more players on waivers today that they could look to a move in that front to gain somebody else in that regard, or possibly through a minor trade pickup or something to that effect. But I do think the Jets are going to want to probably add a little bit more depth. That's why those players were brought in the first place. But unfortunately, it was not to be once we get to the waiver point. Now, let's now jump over and take a look here at the additions to the roster that was made during this offseason. Of course, we have Paul Stastny, who was brought in to address that number 2 center spot. He was acquired via trade from Vegas. Of course, as I mentioned, he was brought in a couple years back to be that number 2 center and really fit quite nicely. Played well with Laine and Ehlers. It looks as though this time he's probably going to be playing with Laine and Connor. It looks as though they have Laine and Connor playing together, and they have Ehlers up with Scheifele and Wheeler. That seems to be the lineup that they've been going with here towards the end of training camp. So we'll see what they start the season with, but that seems to be the expected lineup here on their opening night. Of course, they did re-sign Dylan Demelo. I mean, he was acquired at the deadline, but was a free agent. So I'm including him here as basically a re-addition because he was re-signed, and like I said, he's a good fit there. They did also add Derek Forbort, who's also another veteran defenseman, added some extra depth. He was added along with Spiza, but of course they decided to keep Forbort on the main roster. Spiza was the extra and needed waivers and is gone. Of course, they also drafted Cole Perfetti at their first-round draft pick in the 2020 NHL draft. We'll see if Perfetti gets time at the NHL level this year, where he's going to fit. Obviously, we'll have to see because obviously at this point, junior hockey is pretty much on hold. The Western Hockey League appears to be ready to go maybe in February. It's what they're hoping for, but I know in Quebec and Ontario, there's a lot of places that it's going to be a while, and I would not be shocked if there's no junior hockey for the remainder of the year. It's a real possibility in a lot of those areas. So some of these guys like Perfetti could end up sticking around their NHL clubs for the whole season. If nothing else, they at least see some playing time and at the same time get some valuable experience. Obviously, they can allow them to play a certain number of games before the contract kicks in. So we'll see how the Jets handle Perfetti. And they did have Trevor Lewis on a PTO at training camp. I did not get the news before recording this video where things stand with Trevor Lewis. It seemed as though they were going to be signing him, but I didn't get a chance to double check that. So check the pinned comment down below. I'll make sure that's verified here before this ends up going live on YouTube, because this is being recorded before the roster submissions are all completed. Now, as far as we're going to take a look now at some players that need to bounce back and break through to really help this team be, a more successful team for the coming year. And we're also going to take a look at some players who I feel could have an uncertain future, which is what we've been doing for all teams here, just to kind of do a pros and cons type of list here heading into the season. Now, for bounce back, I'm going to go ahead and put Blake Wheeler on this list as a captain of the team. His production was down a bit last year. He did have to rejiggle where he played in the lineup a bit because of Scheifele injuries. And at the end of the day, him and Scheifele are a terrific 1-2 punch. They certainly impact each other's production. And really overall, Wheeler's point totals were down. I think he can do a little bit better. And I think having a more solid top 6 will help balance things out here as well. But certainly, I don't really think he had a bad season by any means, but I do think Blake Wheeler can be better than he was last season. So we'll see if he can bounce back and certainly add some more offense to his game for the coming year. As far as breakthrough players go, we have a few guys that can kind of fall into that category. One of them very well could be Jack Roslovic if he ends up signing and sticking with this team. He's a player that's been waiting to break out and break through for a while, and he hasn't really been able to seize the opportunity. I know at this point it doesn't look like he's going to sign, so it's quite possible if he does break through, it'll be with somebody else. We'll have to wait and see how that materializes. But ultimately, he's a player that if they can kind of mend fences and get him in the lineup, then obviously, that's an option as well. Now, another bounce-back player, certainly as well, you could probably say Patrik Laine. As much as he didn't really have a bad season, again, like Wheeler, I suspect his totals to go through the roof this year. He's playing for a contract. Obviously, if he does really want to be traded like the rumors have it, then clearly he's going to want to showcase himself. He got a more solid center to play with this year, playing with Kyle Connor, who's a terrific playmaker as well in the wing. I think Laine could have a monster season and contend for the Rocket Richard Trophy. So, therefore, I do expect him to maybe bounce back and have one of his best seasons. Even though his numbers really weren't terrible last year, I think he can do better again and really help Winnipeg improve. Another breakthrough player for the Jets this year could be Mason Appleton. It looks as though he's going to be on the opening night roster. Should be able to get a more regular spot, so he's another guy who could certainly provide some secondary scoring, some more depth in the bottom six. Jansen Harkins is another player I think that throughout the season very well could also play a role like that. I know he's not likely going to be in the opening night roster, but he's somebody who came in last year during the bubble and certainly kind of provided a little bit of a spark. So those are the main players I suspect we can see some big improvements from this year and kind of break through for Winnipeg. Now, as far as players with uncertain future, this part is real easy. It's Roslovic and Laine, as I mentioned, is both publicly known that both players have requested a trade out of town. Now, whether or not those happen will have to remain to be seen, but it does seem to be an extremely real possibility that some of these relationships may not just be able to be mended. In the case of Patrik Laine, I do think there's a small chance that things are kind of reconsidered, but in the case of Roslovic right now, it doesn't seem that way at all. But for Laine, like I said, I would not be surprised if he sticks around for at least this year, has a monster season, increase his value, maybe Winnipeg then pulls off a blockbuster trade at the draft or something in the next offseason, and really gets back a big haul to really overall balance out their team. I know it's not something they're crazy about doing. They were fortunate enough to get him number 2 overall in the draft a few years back, and clearly he's been a solid 30-40 goal man. Not something that just exactly pops up whenever. You need to draft these players, so losing him would be pretty huge, but it depends on what the return is. And that's something they're going to have to revisit here yet again this coming year and offseason as things continue to progress in that relationship. Now, as far as how I think Winnipeg's going to do, I do think Winnipeg's going to contend for a playoff spot in this Northern Canadian division. A lot of people seem to have them ranked anywhere from 5th or 6th for the most part from what I'm seeing, and a lot of predictions and projections. I know it's going to be really tight. To be honest, spots 1 through 6 I think will be very, very tight, and there's not going to be a huge difference. There's going to be some factors here at play for all these teams that I think are going to be unique. It could be COVID-related. What if a team gets decimated with COVID-positive tests? They very well, could end up, obviously impacted greatly by that, and that could impact their season. So it's difficult to predict more than ever before, in my opinion. But I think if Connor Hellebuyck can backstop them like he did last year and be that backbone of the team, you have at least a slightly improved blue line. You have a little bit better balanced top 6. This team should be able to get better. And I also think when it comes to teams like Vancouver and Calgary especially, I really think they can give those teams a good run for their money. And of course Ottawa, who's expected to be near the bottom. But again, like I said in their video, I think they could surprise people. But I don't know if they'll surprise to the point that they'll be up much out of the basement. But still, there's already 3 teams I feel that they have potential to be better than. I mean, even when it comes to Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, it's difficult to say as well. A lot of things on paper, Toronto, Montreal probably look to me to be the strongest 2 teams. I think the Oilers are going to be better than a lot of people think too, but it's really hard to predict. So it's hard to say, but I do think Winnipeg, at the very least, they're going to contend for a playoff spot right till the end. And if they don't make it, it's going to be awfully close. But I think it's a real chance here they can get in. And if they can get in and stay healthy, I think they can make some noise and kind of surprise people again. Because I'm not sure that last year was really a true depiction of just how good this team is. But at the end of the day, that blue line is the area by far that needs to get better than the rest of the team if they're going to stand a real chance to have any kind of sustained success for longer stretches of the regular season and deep into the playoffs. So let me know what your thoughts are on the Winnipeg Jets. What kind of season do you expect them to have? What kind of players on this team? Which players do you expect to break through or bounce back, or who's likely going to be moved before the season's up? Are we going to see deals for Roslovic and Laine, or is this going to drag on for a while? And can they, overlook the distraction and have team success? Let me know your thoughts down below, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.